Welcome to the third episode of the Caffeine, Sarcasm, and Insanity podcast, now on both YouTube and Apple Podcasts. I am Chris Ruggieri, also called the Knee Account Phoenix. And before we begin, please like, share, comment, subscribe, etc. so we can keep making this channel grow and I can create more content for all of you beautiful people out there. Obligatory legal disclaimers. Everything that I say or print is just my own personal opinions, observations, calculations, and predictions. It is not intended to be or even construed as legal advice. Any articles that I reference will be in the description, and as always, everything I do is powered by caffeine, sarcasm, and insanity. Alright, now that's out the way. The last podcast was about the SEC disclosure rulings, privacy regulations, and how the government is really homing in on tech. Well, today's topic is around resiliency in critical infrastructure, deregulating part of it while still regulating other parts of those same critical infrastructure verticals. In particular, it's more of a, why is the government homing in on tech while ignoring problems with much larger and farther-reaching implications? Now, I know you have to be wondering, what does critical infrastructure have to do with tech? Well, in the world of tech, everything is interconnected. Each piece aids or supports another piece. Critical infrastructure is just like tech, where everything is interconnected. It's also the backbone that tech relies on. And you'll see that more as we dive a little deeper into things. So let's go ahead and get started. So to start us off, let me define critical infrastructure. To do that, I'm going to use the InfraGard example. InfraGard is a partnership organization, for those that don't know, between private sector companies and public law enforcement agencies at the local, state, and federal levels. I've been a member for many years now, and we break it down into these 16 critical infrastructure sectors: the chemical sector, commercial facilities sector, communications sector, critical manufacturing sector, dams sector, defense industrial base sector, emergency services sector, energy sector, financial services sector, food and agriculture sector, government facilities sector, healthcare and public health sector, information technology sector, nuclear reactors, materials and waste sector, transportation systems sector, and water and wastewater systems sector. Whew. That's a long list. Might need to grab a water in a minute. So, the regulators for a good bit of these are the different state and local public service commissions. Granted, there are a host of other federal, state, and local agencies that regulate. For example, anything transportation or roadways, that's handled by either federal or state Department of Transportation. In Alabama, Alabama Power, which serves the majority of the state, and Birmingham Waterworks, which includes pretty much the whole Birmingham metro area, are both regulated by Alabama's Public Service Commission. And North American Electric Reliability Corporation, more commonly known as NERC, on top of that for the power grid. Now, some of these sectors aren't exactly, regulated per se. IT, for one, is not exactly regulated. But the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, again, more commonly known as CISA, which is under the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, they do provide some guidance, a lot of guidance actually. And with InfraGard provides us with information that DHS, FBI, CISA, and other government agencies have many times before the general public gets that information. Now, publicly traded companies, while they are still private sector, on top of the federal, state, and local regulations, they are also somewhat regulated by the SEC, Treasury, etc., which goes back to my second episode. So here's a quick example of CISA's guidance. So this is CISA's Guide to Critical Infrastructure Security and Resiliency. It's basically just a link to a PDF that you can look at here. Ignore the 2019 date, because if you look back at this one, it was revised December of 2020. And onwards to the resiliency piece of this. In tech, when we hear resiliency, we think of failovers and continuity plans and things along that pathway. A hot spare, if you will, to move over to that hot spare in the event of an incident. This is where your backup solutions, your actual hot spare environments, things of that kind, along that line come in. So an organization's tech teams know that things are going to happen. And we need to prepare for that eventuality. But what about the physical resiliency? In tech, that would be a secondary data center that can become production if your normal production data center gets hit by a meteor. But can the same be said for water and wastewater services? Or the energy sector? Or transportation? We just heard about the tragedy in Baltimore with the Francis Scott Key Bridge, but there are examples long before that. That bridge being out is now forcing a complete redirection commute. And for many people, this means hours more on the road each day, more stress, more time away from their families. This also increases commute and strain on the other bridge locations, the next closest one up. I'm going to reference back to my first podcast a little bit. Any organization that doesn't offer remote options, that can offer remote options, they are pushing all of that more stress, that more time on the road, more time away from the family. They're pushing all of that more onto their employees. They planted their flagpole, and it's their employees that are now paying the price for an accident far beyond their control. The bridge incident is a good example of where physical resiliency failed, but when organizations offer remote options, they don't feel the same impact. Resiliency is just the backup plan when all other plans fail. Are organizations in Baltimore that are affected now offering remote options until the bridge is back in place? That's not data I currently have. But there is your crossover between technical and physical resiliency. Then there's Colonial Pipeline. We all saw everything on the news about that. Energy sector hit with ransomware, didn't have the tech resiliency, and it shut them down for a while. Wikipedia says that 55% of all fuel consumed on the East Coast travails the Colonial Pipeline. Here's an article from Wikipedia about the attack, and you can see it clearly says about 55% of all fuel consumed on the East Coast arrives via that pipeline. So it is obviously a very critical thing. CISA later on comes out with what we've learned. Biggest reason I wanted to point this one out, captured headlines around the world, snaking car lines at gas stations all across the eastern seaboard, panicked Americans filling bags with fuel. That shows they know that this is critical infrastructure. Here's another. Transportation sector lacking physical resiliency. Train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, February 11th, 2019. Or the same company's train derailment in Calhoun County, Alabama on February 3rd, 2023. And another in Newcastle, Pennsylvania on May 11th, 2023. All Norfolk Southern, all examples of a transportation sector, and in my opinion, shows they did not maintain their physical infrastructure. And during the fires, no other trains could run through East Palestine. That's the exact reason why bridges and railways are of such strategic importance from both an economic and a military perspective. Now, some would argue that when an organization is breached or under ransomware attack, that potentially millions are affected. Yet, when physical resiliency isn't also maintained, regulated, and most importantly, more closely monitored, this can lead to a breakdown of the entire system. What good does it do for a retailer to maintain customer privacy if they have no products to sell? No products, no customers, no customer data to protect. How about all the parts and equipment being brought across those rail lines to the energy sector? For a nuclear power plant, what good does it do to protect the systems that secure that when the danger lies in them not getting the equipment and parts needed to maintain the power production? Now, I know that's a bit of an extreme example, but I can tell you for everyone that lives within a 500-mile radius of a nuclear power plant, it's a concern for them. Far-reaching implications. So the question becomes, how do we provide physical resiliency for physical infrastructure and transportation? More importantly, knowing that these are of such strategic importance, why isn't the government homing in on this? I mean, why is the government so focused on tech when every piece of this is important? So, for starters, having a maintenance window, just like tech, to maintain the rail cars. The East Palestine, Ohio derailment was from an overheated, poorly oiled wheel bearing. Why wasn't that fixed during a regularly scheduled maintenance window? A little bit of personal background here. My father owned an HVAC company for decades. It's actually one of the businesses I bought half of when he had his heart attack so that he could still have some income coming in during his recovery. Well, the relevance of the HVAC business is that when we did fall or spring maintenance on these HVAC systems, many of which were commercial or industrial, we would check the fan bearings every single time. And if one looked or felt loose, close to failure, we would replace that bearing. We would be proactive. So why wasn't that train car, that bearing, checked or replaced during the last maintenance window? Do they even have a maintenance window? I mean, in tech, we have maintenance windows for patching, rebooting, other tasks baked straight into our processes. Because failure to maintain, fix, or update can lead to breaches and compromises in your systems. Why aren't other fields the same way? And if they are, how did that bearing get missed? If they have these maintenance checks, was it a failure in the process that missed it? Here's a little bit about what happened in East Palestine. So here's the article. Around 9 p.m., February 3rd, train derailed, 38 cars, fire ensued. But the initial report from the NTSB on the 23rd, although a wheel bearing had been heating up, the report said, an alarm did not sound to alert the crew to check a hot axle until just before the train derailed. So there's two different pieces to that. You've got the, for some reason, not checked bearing, and you have the sensor that would tell it, hey, I'm getting a little warmer than I should be here, not going off. Both of which could potentially have been found in a maintenance window. Here's the article about the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in Alabama, ironically hours before the CEO was to testify about the East Palestine. Led to a toxic chemical spill. I don't believe this one actually had a reason. They have not determined that, to my knowledge. And here's the one from May, 9 rail cars from Norfolk Southern. And again, goes right back to East Palestine. Pretty much everything's getting tied back. Again, no cause of this one just yet. Then we have the water issues at Camp Lejeune. We've all seen those class action suit commercials. And Flint, Michigan, which is another example of failure to maintain infrastructure. California is supposed to be an economy unto itself, according to their representatives. Yet they get water from the Colorado River through multiple compacts, multiple agreements. Their entire plan is based on a river in another state to sustain them. Where is their backup plan? Where is their physical resiliency? I can actually kind of understand a little bit why California lacks this, though, and we could thank Robin Williams for that answer.
I can't give them shit. I live in California. I live on God's Etch-a-Sketch. It's crazy.
Where's the physical resiliency in this vertical? It's not there. Water is critical to almost everything. There's a whole joke about it. There is no life without water, because without water, there is no coffee. Without coffee, I kill you all. A little bit of dark humor there, but drinking, hygiene, sanitation, without water, life does not exist. Clean water is an essential part of critical infrastructure. So why is this not considered at least as important as tech? I'm bringing this up more to show that resiliency is not just a tech thing. It is a need across all the critical infrastructure verticals. Not every problem can be solved by tech, but some of the same principles can be applied. Secondary water reserve, for example. That would be the equivalent of a second data center if it was tech. I mean, replacing piping is the equivalent of replacing outdated hardware. In tech, we generally have a lifespan of around 5 years on hardware. Flint's water issue is due to ancient piping. Use a similar life cycle, obviously more than 5 years, but use a similar life cycle to replace the piping. Right now, those pipes in Flint are the equivalent of the computers that used to take up an entire room. Replace them with the compute power of a smartphone, continuing along that same analogy, and you've already got enough computing that it took to put people on the moon. Iron and lead piping replaced with newer, longer-lasting components. On to energy and telecom, and moving a little bit more towards the deregulation side of this episode. I'm going to highlight current state of Alabama, because I am intimately familiar with Alabama and Alabama Power and the telecom companies here. Why is it that every time a leaf blows off a tree within a 1,000-mile radius of Alabama, a third of the state loses power? I mean, where is the physical resiliency of different pathways in the power grid so that doesn't happen? And don't get me started on the lack of communications providers. I live in an area where there is one, count it, one, possible non-satellite, meaning non-HughesNet, Starlink, whatever, telecom choice. Yet if you drive 1 mile one direction or 1.5 miles the other direction, you got two choices. Now, when I asked the particular company that has this stretch why that was, it was alluded to that this stretch between those two directions is what I'm going to start calling a regulated monopoly. Somehow the company in my area worked it out where Spectrum, which is the provider a mile up the road either direction, or any other provider cannot come into this little area. This is company W's turf, so this little stretch...
Whoa, no touchy. No touchy. No touch.
Excuse me, Your Highness.
So any businesses or home offices in this little stretch are locked into a single provider? Where's the physical resiliency there? Where's the backup plan? I mean, in the case of lack of choices, businesses suffer. Businesses that provide products and services to their communities. When these businesses suffer because they can't get the services they need, they don't stay open for long. Also, many companies are opening themselves up to a wider, more diverse workforce by offering remote options. How can they recruit when their potential employees are locked into subpar services that barely support them? How can businesses hope to grow and thrive when they're locked into a subpar service? These regulated monopolies only benefit the companies profiting from them. They don't support the businesses, they don't support the people, they only support their own profits. In an interconnected world, everything plays a part. Businesses offer products and services, they need employees to provide those products and services. Their employees then take the wages and consume other products and services. And then they need to protect themselves and their customers. When anyone is locked into subpar choices or lack of choices, we will see failures everywhere. And here's where the deregulation while still regulation piece comes in. Deregulate the areas. It's no longer a this is our turf conversation. Allow Spectrum or Verizon or any other telecom provider to come in. Allow the people that need internet and power to have a choice. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, NERC sets the regulations for power providers. They regulate how power is distributed. They receive their funding from bulk power providers. They claim to be an independent pseudo-government agency of the bulk providers as a nonprofit. So that they're claiming to be, they are independent of the bulk providers, but they're some pseudo-government agency. But how can they be entirely independent when those providers are the ones paying the bills? I mean, this setup leads into a situation like we see in Alabama and Georgia, where smaller independent providers and co-op power companies have to buy their power from the parent company of Alabama Power and Georgia Power, which is Southern Company through Southern Power. This also leads to a few situations like we see in Alabama involving alternate power generation and unexplained power bills. Alternative power generation? Where the rest of the country is pushing for these options here in Alabama? That'll bring the hammer down on you like you would not believe. I had a friend of mine went totally solar, dropped completely off the power grid for the exact leaf blowing off a tree within 1,000 miles issue. So he called the power company, ripped out his meter so he wasn't pushing his excess back into the grid or getting any kind of usage fees or account taxes or whatever you want to call it. And then less than a month later was hit with a massive set of fines, fees, and other insanity under the guise of a solar tax. Don't believe me? Check out this article. Federal energy regulator said this week that the Alabama Public Service Commission, that's going to come back, may be violating federal energy law by allowing Alabama Power to charge fee to customers with solar panels, likely paving the way for a court battle over whether the fee can remain in place. The Federal Energy Regulation Commission Chairman Richard Glick and FERC Commissioner Allison Clements issued a statement this week that challengers to the fee had presented a strong case that the fee was discriminatory and violated a law called the Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act, or PURPA. Very oddly named there. Second article saying pretty much the same thing. The FERC decision opens the door for our case against Alabama Power's punitive monthly solar fee to go to federal court. Originally, the federal agency declined to hear a petition to initiate enforcement action against the Public Service Commission. I told you that Public Service Commission is going to be a theme here. You'll find out why very, very shortly. Next, there's a whole scandal here in Alabama over an unexplainable spike. We are talking from going from less than 1,000 kilowatt hours a month to over 9,000 kilowatt hours for a couple months. And then everything just magically goes back to normal under 1,000 kilowatt usage. Tons of complaints to the Alabama Public Service Commission. I told you that was going to be a theme. And nothing happened. And here in Alabama, it's not just power providers that we're seeing. Bessemer Waterworks, which is part of the Birmingham Waterworks Board, has gone up an insane amount in the last 6 months, and the water has this neat trick of changing to all the colors of the rainbow. Bessemer City residents expressed outrage recently over water discoloration that they say has been an ongoing issue. In a post on the Facebook group Living in Bessemer City, residents stated their water color ranged from green to brown, and some households say they have experienced this coloration for more than 6 months. So that brings up the question of what were the PSCs doing, the Public Service Commissions, what were they doing while this was happening? Aren't they supposed to stop these things from happening? Aren't they supposed to protect the people when things like this do happen? Where were the regulators then? The problems and unanswered questions come down to the people regulating. Birmingham Water Works was so bad in the late 2000s, early 2010s, that former mayor of Birmingham, Larry Langford, was convicted in 2009 of bribery, conspiracy, fraud, and other offenses related to his actions while serving as Birmingham's mayor and as a member of the Birmingham Water Works Board. Lots of and I'm going to quote this, corruption, cronyism, bid rigging, conflicts of interest, improper contracting practices, and mismanagement, end quote. And the ripples of that are still being felt 14 years after he was sentenced. Here's the article from Birmingham Watch. State grand jury investigating Birmingham Waterworks Board and other aspects of Birmingham and Jefferson County government yielded 3 indictments Wednesday. This was December 6th or so, 2017. Attorney General Steve Marshall and the Birmingham Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced the arrest of Sherry Lewis, chairwoman of the Birmingham Waterworks Board, Jerry Jones, former vice president at Arcadis, and Terry Wilson, owner of Global Solutions Intent, on state felony ethics charges. 2 contractors pled guilty to, for lack of a better term, bribery. Convicted of offering or giving anything to a public official for the purpose of corruptly influence official action. You could have just summed that up with bribery. Why do they have to make it difficult? Third article about board member Lewis, as well as the rest of Mayor Langford's crew. My question is, where were the public service commissions during all of this? What were they doing the whole time? Again, why are the government agencies honing in on tech, which if you saw the second episode, you'll know it's because they can make money off of it, yet completely ignoring their own responsibilities when it comes to things like, providing non-Skittles water, not allowing utilities to commit price gouging, and everything else we've been talking about today? Here's where things get tricky and interesting. So on one hand, I've been saying we need to deregulate the provider locations, but on the other hand, I'm saying we need to keep the public service commissions in place, regulating the prices to keep them lower. I will be the first one to say less government is better, but in certain situations, it is necessary. It's a pseudo-monopoly. Huge price increase for no reason. It's the PSC's job, the Public Service Commission's job, to prevent extreme price increases. Yet they don't do it when it's clear to everyone with more brain cells than an amoeba that it's an error at best and price gouging at worst. Here's another series of articles. Taste the rainbow. The Alabama Public Service Commission has been in the spotlight for the past few months when a cold snap set power bills skyrocketing. Explanations and answers have been hard to come by for consumers struggling to pay bills $500 and higher. In 2022, the Public Service Commission approved 3 rate hikes for Alabama Power. Further on down that list, the president of the Public Service Commission, Ms. Kavanaugh, disputes the claim by utility watchdogs, environmental groups, and candidate McCollum that the PSC allows Alabama Power a higher profit margin compared to other states. She said Alabama has a fair return and is one of the lowest margins in the country. Anytime they've earned too much, it's gone back to the rate payers, she said. Falsely, this particular article says that Alabama's top utility regulator, Twinkle Kavanaugh, falsely implied a state legislative review committee last month that the Alabama Public Service Commission had more than halved the amount of profit Alabama Power is allowed to collect from customers under her leadership. An Energy and Policy Institute analysis shows Alabama Power's profits have remained largely steady at levels far higher than the rest of the utility industry in recent years, despite spiking utility prices, leaving many customers unable to afford their monthly electricity bills. EPI's analysis found that Alabama Power customers are paying more than $250 million per year in extra profits that they would be paying if Alabama Power earned a profit margin at allowed industry rates, according to data published by the Edison Electric Institute, the Trade Association for Investor-Owned Utilities. Of note, Kavanaugh did not respond to a request for comment. I'm sorry, that might have been one you probably should have answered the phone on. Could just be me. I know there's a little insanity there, but might want to answer that phone call. Power bill of $773. I'm sorry. I live in a decently sized home, and my power bill is nowhere near that. Something went wrong. This one is a video. Unfortunately, I can't play it, but I will have the link for it in the description. But it's the news story on February 2nd of this year about the frustrations over Alabama Power. ABC 3340 has one. No pattern as far as where the complaints came from. Complaints were filed in several cities and counties across the state. 3 were in regards to reconnecting. 1 was reference to a low-hanging line. 1 was about getting transmission rerouted. There's that different pathways thing. And 6 lacked details about the complaint with no issue listed from the person filing. More than 100 of the complaints centered on high bills. Customer raised concerns about usage and accuracy of the meters. Remember I said error at best, price gouging at worst? It could have been a problem with the meters, could have been a software glitch. It happens. Not gonna go after somebody for it. Accuracy of the meters. 10 of the complaints stated they use gas and propane. 6 complaints referenced not even being home with no one living in the residence or having a working HVAC unit. I'm starting to lean more towards there was an error there until you start digging deeper. Blow this up just a little bit more. Alabama's 3rd rate hike of the year, 2nd in as many months. Okay. What? That's too many rate hikes back to back to back to back like that. Passed without discussion or debate or even the sign of the cross. Took a press release from Alabama Power itself later that day to translate the events of that meeting to acknowledge the rate increase effective in January would add about $6.81 per month for the typical residential customer. Inflation's going ballistic. Your money's going less and less. Hold off on the rates, people. I mean, come on. After rate increases in July and November, the average customer will pay about $21.81 per month than at the start of the year. That is $273.72 more a year. That is a massive hit. Especially for someone on a fixed income. This one is going to pop back up again later. Let's see if I can. Matrix is a shadowy LLC pack style thing, but the biggest thing I wanted to show here is how much power, no pun intended, these power companies have. When you have someone saying this is election rigging, you have a powerful corporate player in Florida politics using its financial resources to defeat a candidate without any disclosure to the public. Coming from a director of federal campaign finance reform, that one hurts. Might want to take a little bit of a deeper look into why some of these companies have the record profits that they're having. Now, we've discussed several cases of infrastructure and physical resiliency, railways, bridges. We discussed the service providers, power, water, telecom. We even mentioned who oversees those different areas. So that brings me back to oversight and the regulators that handle most of those issues. Yep. The question I've got, why aren't they handling them? For example, in the chemical sector, chemical company released unsafe chemicals and waste into the water system. Regulators are all over that. They see fines and penalties. They're rubbing their hands together, getting their hand caught in the cookie jar again. That's another reference back to the second podcast. We see plans of action to take care of the problems, but yet in so many of the other sectors, we're seeing less of those actions if there's any action at all. I mean, take Flint, Michigan, for example. That problem still has not been resolved. The issues at Camp Lejeune took a class action suit to see any effort at all. Where are the regulators? Why wasn't this a concern before the people rose up to complain and made their voices heard? I mean, even the White House is ignoring the issue. I had a little bit of hope here. In 2024, they released a strategy for cyber physical resilience, fortifying our critical infrastructure for a digital world. I'm going to go over just a few pages here. So I wanted to go over some of his, the president being he in this case, some of his council of advisors on science and technology. There is a whole lot of academia in there. And a whole lot of major companies. I mean, 3M is not exactly something small. Bill Gates, duh. I just wanted to show, and the main reason I wanted to show the people is because one of the things that I had asked and begged on the second episode was to please get advice from industry experts. So I'm very glad to see a lot of these names and where they're working or where they're from, what knowledge they're bringing to the table. That's exactly what I'm wanting to see. I jumped down to page 12, and this is available for download. Same 16 critical infrastructures that I mentioned before. And I wanted to bring this one up. It was recommendation 4B, resilience by design. Now, the one thing that actually got me to perk up. I was happy. I was like, yes, we're going to do resiliency by design, kind of like we're doing security by design. That's how it's supposed to be. Why are you only talking about tech? That I was so hopeful. But again, we see that it's a focus on tech. I mean, yeah, tech is shiny, it's pretty, it's ever-changing, it's a hot-button topic, I get it. But why is tech their primary focus? Why aren't we seeing that same ferocity in infrastructure and its physical resiliency? It needs to be all the infrastructure verticals. So in my last podcast, we discussed the new SEC ruling. Just to remind everyone that didn't catch it, the ruling basically sets a limitation on reporting material breach using the vaguest possible definition. and because that vagueness gives them the right to move the goalposts, come into your business hoping to find something to fine you with. And all of it's about tech, of course, because we know tech is this same strange, mysterious magic that has to be controlled and controlled through fines and penalties. Yet where are the fines and penalties from the regulators about infrastructure? One way to answer some of these questions, anyway, is to follow the money. When a power company or a water provider charges more, there's more taxes to be collected. There's palms to grease, if you know what I mean. Doesn't matter if those higher bills or poorer services harm people and businesses alike. It's all about the money. There's a young woman on Facebook that has actually been following the money trail all the way to the governor of Alabama's office. Let's take a look at some of her findings. So the first thing I wanted to bring up was this Energy Alabama graphic here. That yellow line is the excess Alabama power profits that are above the industry average. 190 million, 185 million, going all the way up to 277 million. I mean, it's right there in black and white. Then you have, I love her notes. I mean, there's not a lot more I can say. That is extremely detailed. I love the flow chart. There is a lot of really good information, so that's why I was going to leave it up there for just a moment. But very, very, very impressive. And looking at those articles, those copies of power bills, massive profits well above the national average, it tells me one big thing that I'm going to go into super deep detail on the next episode, but I'm going to bring it up here. The Public Service Commission in Alabama is in the pocket of utilities. Game, set, match. There is no other logical explanation. In my opinion, every one of them should be excluded or prohibited from holding a public office again. They've already proven their corruption. And didn't we just discuss a former mayor who's in jail of, what was it again? Hang on, let me look back real quick. Oh yeah, corruption. Now, unfortunately, he passed away in prison, but corruption. If this were the healthcare sector, we'd be in a Health South situation. In 2002, SEC went after Health South and Richard Scrushy for overvaluing the organization. It was the first successful prosecution of a SOX claim. And he did it to increase the company's share value and pad his own pocket, but that is the very definition of corruption. Looking at all these scandals, it almost sends a message that it's okay when the government does it, but not private organizations. Makes you think, doesn't it? Right. Between 99 and the second quarter of 2002, Health South intentionally overstated its earnings, identified as income before taxes and minority interests, by at least 1.4 billion. That's a B, yes. In reports filed with the Commission, Health South also overstated earnings, identified as income before income taxes and minority interests. The quarterly report on the Form 10Q filed with the Commission during these years. Senior accountant was convened to fix the earnings shortfall. But that kind of gave me a little bit of a chuckle on that. Like I said it in the second episode, said it a lot. I took an oath to defend this country and will die trying if that's what it takes. That doesn't mean I have to like the idiots trying to run it. And it's not just here in Alabama. Here's a update, if you can call it that, on the Michigan water situation. And this was in March of 2023. We're in April of 24, so 10 years later. 10 years after that debacle, and they still cannot remove their head from their buttocks? I mean, what have they been doing for the past decade? Oh, right. Just follow the campaign money. That lovely woman from Facebook already showed us how she followed the money, and her research cannot be the only one. It's sad to say many of these appointed, selected, or hired experts have been getting their pockets padded instead of doing their damn jobs. Fixing the situation is not a priority for them. Yet taxing and fining everything imaginable in tech is getting jammed down everyone's throats. Makes you think, doesn't it? However, what can we do? How can we fix a system that is so obviously broken? Believe it or not, the answer is easy. It's by speaking up. Our Constitution gives us the power of a voice and the power of a vote. So stop voting parties and letters. Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, whatever. Stop voting parties. Start voting policy. Because no party has it right. They all suck. And Camp Lejeune's class action suit, that showed us exactly how powerful we can be when we stand together united. It showed us that we have the power to hold these officials and these regulators accountable for their actions. And with a powerful enough voice, we can give them the attitude adjustment they need. Now, those of us in the 35 plus age range, not saying my age, you can guess, know that attitude adjustments were kind of the PC way of saying getting your butt whooped by your parents because you screwed up. Well, guess what? They screwed up. It's time for their attitude adjustment. Now, you're probably asking yourself, what does this have to do with resiliency and deregulation? Well, number one, those panels, boards, commissions, they're the regulators. Two, they're not putting the money back into the physical infrastructure or physical resiliency. The whole leaf blowing off a tree within 1,000 miles on a third of the state losing power, or Flint, Michigan's piping issue. Yeah, that's what I mean. They're not putting it back into the physical infrastructure. But everybody and their grandmother has something to say about tech. How it should be regulated, and the fines and penalties when that doesn't happen. And many of these people who barely have enough knowledge to turn on a computer or a smartphone and maybe understand a little bit how to use it, but definitely don't understand how it works. Tech is magic after all. Yet in many critical infrastructure sectors, we have panels, commissions, and boards of experts failing at the job they're supposed to be experts in. It's like they want their privacy secured, but never stop to think that the person who could give them the confirmation that their data is secure can't get to work because there's a bridge out. I mean, it's like they want to control the information a company has access to, but complains when the company is late delivering their mail order because a train got stuck on an impassable track. They want every aspect of a company investigated. However, their investigators are too sick to work from drinking contaminated water. They complain with everyone else that their internet sucks, but they do nothing to allow more options to be made available. So basically, what I've been trying to say this entire time is resiliency is more than just a tech problem. Our world is interconnected in ways that most people don't take the time to even consider. Each part of it is a cog in a grand machine, a beautiful machine. if one of those cogs breaks, the whole machine can come tumbling down. We will never win a war against Mother Nature. All we can do is plan the best we can. That includes having a backup plan. Part of that initial plan and backup plan should be ensuring the panels, boards, and commissions are doing the jobs that they are selected to do. But again, what do I know? I'm just some nobody schmuck that stuck here in Alabama. And I've said that before. But all I'm trying to do is to get everyone to take a step back, think for a moment or two. And I hope I've done that. See you next time. Or I'm going to stick with this pseudo-political topic just a little bit longer and say extremely loudly for the people in the back that haven't been paying attention why politics has no business in the corporate environment. Should be a fun one. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, etc. All the links will be in the description. And I'll see you next time with more caffeine, sarcasm, and insanity.